Okay, so it's got a pretty thick, rich tone. Now, can we also just have a listen under here, because this is where the soundboard is actually exposed, which is the resonant part. Just get around wherever you can and just have a listen and just hear the difference between underneath and above. Pianos can vary drastically. Just to give you a few examples of things I've come up against before. You can get the sound of the hands on the keys, actually, just the sort of tapping noise. Sometimes you're listening to a mic and you're like, what's that weird noise? And you realise it's just that, and you're like, oh shit, I've got to move the mic out of the way of those. You know, squeaking pedals, pianos that are out of tune, pianos that have got dull strings. There's a whole plethora of stuff, but this thing is a bit of a dream, really, as far as like clean, posh sounding piano. Again, it's not always necessarily the right thing for the right piece of music. You know, if you're recording Tom Waits and he's playing some cranky old ballad, you're not going to want something like this. You're going to want something that's out of tune and being beaten up. And so, you know, like having a good selection of drums, a good section of acoustic guitars, or whatever, pianos are the same thing. Again, it's like a big luxury. But just to be aware, you know, there's many shades of what you can do. Essentially, if we want to try and capture the piano, the tone of the piano without too much of the room, I mean, we could probably put a mic like here or somewhere around the side and get a fairly good balanced tone. Like I said, I don't think you have really an awful lot of trouble with this. If we want to get something that's a little more detailed, we probably want to look at miking up, you know, where the sound is actually emanating from, like with anything, you know, looking at the centre of the flame, as I was talking about earlier.
I was going to say, we did that for our first year. I think it was a 57 we put in.
Right.
It didn't have the best subtonal. Okay. What's the best? Was it a bit condensed for the best results, or?
There's no rules, but I would say if you want to get a fairly flat, even sort of, you know, decent sound, I would try and go for a couple of small diaphragm condensers to begin with, partly because there's a certain sort of boominess to the piano, which we don't really want to overemphasise the low frequencies on a grand piano, because it's already very, very bassy. I don't know if you know much about the way that microphone diaphragms work, but in a sort of simplistic fashion, the larger the diaphragm, the wider the frequency response is. So if I want to actually counteract the amount of low frequencies that this is kicking out, probably use a smaller diaphragm mic, because it's not going to give me as much low end as something like the Neumanns or the 414s, which have larger capsules. I'm going to go for condenser microphones because they capture a little bit more detail and they have a little bit of a wider pickup pattern. I think if you went and put SM57s over this, you would probably be making the piano sound sort of smaller and less dynamic than it actually is, as those microphones are, you know, they're fairly focused, peaky sounding things. But again, you've got to put it in context. You know, if I've got a rock track with loads of guitars and stuff going on, and I just want a little bit of, you know, Iggy Pop style piano or something kind of going on in amongst it, I don't want to mic this up with a really posh mic, because it's not going to cut through the mix. You know, I probably want to use one mic, and I want to use a bit of compression, and I want to crank some EQ into it to make it work. So in that instance, something like an SM57 might be perfect, even though it's expensive piano. We're not making the most of it, but it's all about the context. So. makeshift harpsichord. Okay, so I'm holding down the sustain pedal here so the strings can all just vibrate on their own. But you've got, you know, a massive PA and a big room in there. If you want to get a grittier sound, try guitar amps, you know, try whacking your snares back through amps or vocals or whatever. It's just like a whole kind of plethora of possibilities for getting new textures.